details, please, with your hosts, Emmanuel and Angela Williams, where we dive deeper into conversations with visionary entrepreneurs to discover what it takes to turn passion into purpose. Listen to real-world stories from self-starters and trailblazers, and discover strategies and innovations shaping a greener future. Whether you are a seasoned business person or just starting out, let this be your go-to resource for inspiration and actionable tips for success. Join us now as we create a brighter, greener future together.
Hello, you're listening to More Details, Please, and I'm Angela Williams.
And Emmanuel Williams.
Learning is our theme this season because staying curious is how you keep your entrepreneurial spirit and dreams alive. So today we have a wonderful guest that'll be joining us to help us continue in that conversation.
And yes, I always like to say that this podcast is for entrepreneurs learning to turn their passion into purpose. We understand how important it is to have a passion and turn it into a purpose because it's really all about sharing your gift and your talent. And as entrepreneurs, we have influence over so many people. We interact with so many people. And if we can be present enough and aware enough and alert enough to realize, to have that realization that my my passion is converted into purpose to make the world a better place, oh, that will be a wonderful thing on the planet to help heal the planet that we're living on. So that's what this podcast is really all about. And we are really excited to get into the psyche of our entrepreneurs because we know that entrepreneurs are a unique species and is always exploring the unknown and step into that makes them uncomfortable. But that's where growth happens. And so we're really excited about um, our podcast. And today this season is really all about learning.
It is. And when we talk about entrepreneurs, we are looking at entrepreneurs who are just starting out or entrepreneurs that have been in business for a while. Or if you are in that middle gap of an entrepreneur where you are too big to be small, but too small to be big. And that is always a space that is close to our heart because we feel in a lot of ways we're in that spot today. So today we're going to be highlighting that untapped superpower called listening. And it's interesting because we've had a lot of practice in listening. And I'm not only talking about in business, in our personal lives as well, and how listening really can be a game changer. And I would say a game changer in both business and your personal life. And it also helps you enhance your leadership skills. So later in the show, we'll be talking to one of our special guests, Josh Parish. He's a U.S. Army combat veteran who served in Iraq. So he's the co-founder of VetLife and the Battle Buddy app, which strengthens the support for veterans where they live and where they work, which is important for the veteran community to know that they have support. They're not out here by themselves.
Well, yeah, today we're talking about listening, and it is a really interesting conversation. And you cannot underestimate listening. And I know it sounds really um, simple, but it's very powerful. Because if you think about it, when you talk about listening, what will be the consequences? Listening as a leader, what will be the consequences if you don't listen? Now, think about all of the mistakes. Think about all the confusion. Think about all of the things that can go wrong if you don't listen. So we want to bring this to our listening audience attention that your ability to listen is such a superpower. And as an entrepreneur, not just as an entrepreneur, but as a father, as a mother, as a leader, as a parent, when you tap into this superpower, I guarantee you that the results that you're going to get, you're going to increase your results in a positive way, I would say by about 50%.
It's interesting because oftentimes people think that when you're listening, you're not doing anything. So maybe you're daydreaming. And in Mayo's case, maybe he's asleep. You never know. But you can't necessarily associate quietness with something bad. Listening is really a strong, confident personality. It is what makes you powerful. It is indeed an untapped superpower, right, Emmanuel?
For sure. And it's funny because when a person is quiet and is not really saying much, people judge them. Well, this is the ego, because now we're talking about how the ego works. People will judge them. Their ego will judge a person by they don't know, or they weak, or they just, they're not saying anything, or they real passive. But listening is a very, very powerful superpower. And when we talk about our ability to listen, one of the things I want to really bring to our listening audience attention is when you're not listening, what are you listening to?
Mm.
Think about it. When you're not listening, or if you didn't hear what was said, what are you listening to? And one of the things that we do is in our podcast is we have this nuggets of wisdom chest where we have all of these nuggets of wisdom that we open up this chest and we pull out nuggets of wisdom so that our listening audience can take these nuggets of wisdom, bring them into their life, plug them in, and use them for practical purposes. It's like a toolbox. And what we talked about earlier today when it came to what nugget of wisdom that we're going to be using today, and what are we going to use in our nuggets of wisdom tool chest when it comes to listening? How do you pull this tool out and plug it in to be able to be a more effective listening? It was really interesting because what we thought about and what we understood was it wasn't really a tool. It was the space in the toolbox that we realized it is a part of a secret weapon that you can use for listening. And that is stillness. That is being quiet. That is being able to create space so that you can interpret and listen to whatever it is that you're trying to hear. Now, the thing that we talked about that will get in the way is your ego judgment. Another thing that could get in the way of you not hearing is you're not listening to what your body is saying. Another thing that could get in the way of you not listening is you too caught up into your thoughts. You so focused in your thoughts and the thoughts that's floating around in your head that you can't hear anything. Another thing that can prevent you from listening is your emotions. You're so attached to your emotions, you can't understand what's going on around you. And then, the last but not least, another thing that could prevent you from listening is your reactions to your thought and your emotions. So today we want to talk about listening and we want to get to the root cause and kind of give some holistic perspective so that when you start the process of listening, these are some of the things that you can take into consideration to make you a more effective listener.
Great point, Emmanuel. Especially in business, traditionally, leaders, they're vocal. They speak, they act, they talk with confidence to the entire room. They're giving instructions, they're telling people what to do. But even the great leaders learn that listening is a game changer and sometimes is more important than speaking.
Yes. And it's funny because the great leaders, they're not only listening to your words, but they're listening to your insecurities. They're listening to your fears. They're listening to your anxieties. And that's a whole different level of connectiveness. You connect deeper. It's sort of like, you know, when us raising our kid, Emmanuel, and as a little kid, we was very aware of giving him our full attention as much as possible. And we was very aware of not allowing our anxieties to spew over into him when we are listening or giving him attention. And I think that's a very powerful spiritual practice because a lot of people take their frustrations out on the people in their families. I give you an example. You could go to work, you can be into it with your boss, you can have issues at work, and you go pick the kid up from school. They running and they playing and they get in the car and they happy to see you. And you tell them, you scream at them, oh boy, sit back there and put your seatbelt on. What that does is that kills their spirit. You don't realize it, but it really, really killed their spirits. Or you can have a spouse and take your frustrations out on your spouse. So you have to be really, really careful to create the necessary space and make sure you're listening to yourself, your ego and your ego attachment so that you can create the space that is in the toolbox that we said that we're going to bring out of you that a practical um, application so that you can become a more effective listener and use that space to be quiet and to be able to connect to whatever that person is trying to say or what is trying to how they are trying to articulate what they're feeling.
Well, here are some of the reasons why listening more can be a game changer. First, lead by example. If you listen more, you remind others to listen more. If you're always talking, then others going to talk. But if you listen more, others will follow suit. It's the importance of paying attention to those around you in the workplace, at home, because it ensures people do the things that are right the first time. So definitely lead by example. Listening brings a sense of calm. It embraces that mental stillness. Emmanuel has mastered that. And it's one of those things where it allows you and him to de stress and achieve more because you know for a fact that listening, being in that moment, brings calm. We also learn to be patient through listening. Patience in business improves our decision making. If we are making rash decisions because we're not listening to all the information or not listening to our employees, then we tend to make poor decisions. We need to listen to our customer. The customer gives us important feedback and information, but it also builds trust. It boosts our reputation and it encourages repeat business. And another most important thing is listening to our employees. Our team encourages us to listen because it improves communication overall. It allows people to feel safe, to open up, share some insight, ideas, and concerns. Listening makes people feel valued. And when people feel valued, they feel happier. So it improves productivity and job satisfaction. So you won't lose valuable staff members because they don't feel heard or seen. So I've learned of something new about listening. There's not just one kind. I mean, there's multiple types of listening, and each one helps to lead differently. Interesting, huh?
Very interesting. But let's talk about this. Let's flip it around. What happens and how do people feel when you're not listening?
They don't feel heard, they don't feel seen, all of those things.
They think they can feel disrespected.
Yes.
You know, they can feel a sense of anxiety. Um, they can feel a sense of distrust.
Mhm.
You know, that's why this conversation about listening is really, really important because you may walk away from a conversation thinking, I got all of the information, I process this, I understand. But another person may walk away from the conversation feeling disrespected. Another person may walk, you have no idea of how they, and this is the thing, what is the difference between listening and hearing? It's a different. Hearing is I heard something. I really didn't process it, but I did hear it. Listening is connecting deeper to an individual or to a situation. It's sort of like um, you hear a door shut outside of your house. You heard it, but you didn't pay no attention. But you hear a door shut from the outside of your house or a car door coming up and closed in the driveway of your house. And you hear it and you bring your attention to it. You heard it, you was listening, but you didn't bring no attention, but you heard it and you listened to it. And the attention that you bring to it is, oh, Angie should be home by now, and I need to be watchful because she's coming in, it's late, and I need to be considerate and open enough to make sure I listen so that I can take the right appropriate action. But when you hearing it, you'll hear it and keep reading a book or keep doing whatever you're doing. And that is the difference between listening and hearing.
Yeah, I mentioned earlier that there were several types of listening, and I'll go over five of them. One is active listening. This is when you give the speaker your full attention, your presence. You make eye contact, you nod, you show that you are truly listening and that you hear them. Then they feel seen. Discriminative listening, that is one of the earliest forms of listening, and it's all about sound and tone. The way you say something or the tone of voice that you use, people pick up on that. So your team members can say they're fine, but when you hear that uncertain way that they say that, it's a clue. And it's also a cue that you might want to dig deeper, like more details, please, to understand what they're really, really feeling. Empathetic listening, thinking of this as deeper listening. You are listening both with your ears and your emotion, your heart. You're trying to understand a person's feelings. I see the situation from your viewpoint. So, seeing it from their viewpoint, which builds trust, which is important as a leader. Critical listening. Now, this is the good one to have in a workplace. You listen and evaluate what's being said, asking yourself, is that accurate? Does that make sense? Because it helps you make better decisions. Yesterday, I had a situation where I heard something and it triggered me to ask more questions when before I just accepted it for what it is. But I was critically listening. And because of that, I was able to get more done in that conversation. Bias listening or selective listening, sometimes husband and wife say either or the other have that. But this is when you only hear what you want to hear, especially if you want a conversation to go a certain way. So, something we can all fall into without even realizing that we are selectively listening. So, be aware if you can help improve the communication and you want things to be better between the receiver and the giver, then you definitely want to ensure you are listening in total and not selective listening.
Well, thank you for that, Angela. I really appreciated that because it kind of brought me back to something. We talk about what is the superpower in listening? What is the superpower in listening? And the superpower in listening is your ability to be quiet, your ability to create space.
And it's funny that you said that because some people think, oh, that just comes naturally. But actually, it's really, really hard to listen in presence, creating space, listening to that other person with all of you.
Yes. And the nugget, the nugget of wisdom in that space is what you're really doing is you're stepping outside of your thoughts.
Mhm.
You literally are stepping outside of, especially of your ego thought. And it's funny because when you're in that space of stillness and quietness, you connect deeper into a superpower of joy, of creativity, of love, of peace. You know, when they asked Michael Jackson, when he on the stage, what do he think about? And then this is really important because when you align yourself with something that you really enjoy, that's where all of the magic start happening. He said, I don't think. He said, I just become music, which means he stepped outside of his thoughts into his superpower and just allow life to unfold through him to be the light of the world. And I'm not saying you have to be a Michael Jackson. I'm not saying you have to be a Michael Jordan. I'm saying, as a regular wife that is conscious of that superpower, when your kids come home from school and they running around and eating, making peanut butter and jelly sandwiches and books and shoes and boots all over the place, when you step into that space of listening, you step into your superpower and you'll be surprised. 20 years later, your kid said, Mom, I remember when I used to we used to come home, we used to eat peanut butter sandwich, but you said something to me one day that really changed me in a way where I look at things and it's something powerful. So you never know. And that is the superpower of listening, but you have to practice it. It's not something that comes overnight. It's something that you have to constantly bring your alert attention to and stay in that space and feel it and be it and then let things happen.
Yeah, but in order to listen more, we need to learn what listening skills are, right?
Oh, for sure. Absolutely. And it really goes back to what we said at the beginning. What are you listening to? And how do you quiet your ego attachment voices in your head? How do you get under control your emotion? How do you get under control your thought processes? And I mean, and even listening to your body when you're not feeling well. You know, all of that is noise.
Mhm.
And once you're able to identify and be able to take your alert superpower into that space, then you start to become you build processes of how to handle whether it's going to the gym or whether it's, you know, meditate, whatever it may be. But that's something that is individualized. And that's something that you have to learn because that is your journey in life.
Yeah, so it's not as simple as having a ear to the conversation, but listening is one of those active activities. So information transfers when you really understand what's going on, and you can only do that through active listening. So, active listening is what we need. And here's a couple things to keep in mind. Focus. Give someone your full attention. Don't be distracted with the phone or whatever else, papers or so on. Pay attention to the details. We like that one. I mean, definitely more details, please. You want to understand what people are saying in detail. You want to resist the urge to interrupt. I mean, sometimes it's like they're saying something and you want to add to it, but just resist that urge to interrupt. Let someone finish to the end. Don't jump right in with advice straight away. Imayo and I talk about that a lot. It is sometimes I just want him to listen. I'm not asking him to solve my problem. I just want him to listen. And for that reason, we practice. Don't just jump in, listen, don't give advice straight away. Get the person to clarify what they mean if you're unsure. That is one of the things that's super important to make sure communication is clear all the way through. If you're not sure what they meant, ask for clarification. Can you give me an example? What do you mean by that? Can you tell me a little bit more? More details, please. Ask open ended questions. Focus on how and what and why. Those are important questions so that you can get more information. Not every question has to be answered with a simple yes or no. And for that reason, open-ended questions work. Smile and nod. Look encouraging. Positive body language is a nonverbal way of saying, yes, I'm listening. A constant nodding is not necessary, but you can definitely let someone know that you are listening by summarizing what they said. So the person knows that you have listened and they have been understood. You understand what they're saying.
Yeah, I think that's great because listening, and I'm excited about our guest that's coming on today. Very, very wise, got a lot of nuggets of wisdom. But listening is really a interaction of energy. And it's funny because you can have a person who's very insecure and just in your skill set of being able to understand how to listen to that person. And that's what psychiatrists and psychologists does. It gives them the openness to be able to express themselves in a way where they may start crying. I mean, I mean, the emotion may take them over. Why? Because they've been suppressed and did not have the ability to have an outlet to express themselves. But your skill set and your ability to be able to listen can open up opportunities and help people in so many ways just by being still.
And as Emmanuel alluded to, our guest, Joshua Parish, a U.S. Army combat veteran, he's someone who has lived leadership under pressure and knows that listening can save lives. So, Josh, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for having me, Angela and Emmanuel.
Yeah, so Josh, tell us a little bit about yourself. I mean, go deep. What was your turning point that led you to create VetLife?
Yeah, and I think I believe it was Emmanuel that mentioned this, the power of listening. I think the reason why our organization exists is because people weren't listening. And when I say people, I meant the government. The government had thought that the services that they were providing to veterans and their families when they left the military was sufficient. And what we found was the core program that is required by the government, it's called the TAP program, Transition Assistance Program, to reacclimate the veteran back into civilian society, was failing about 87% of the veterans that it was designed to help. And we know that 200,000 people leave the military every year. And if your program is failing that large amount of people, that means that you are not listening to them and you are not setting them up for success, which is why myself, as a Iraq war veteran, I went through the same process that every other soldier did. And I was not well equipped and I struggled when I got back into the civilian world, and I believe that it was a direct correlation of that TAP program failing me, because in the military, you abide by a very specific set of instructions and you have a detail oriented life. And then when you get out of the military, nobody's telling you to get up, nobody's telling you to do anything. And so you lose a sense of purpose and you lose a sense of identity. And I believe that's why we have such an alarmingly high rate of suicide among the veteran community.
Well, Josh, I just want to thank you for creating the space and creating the nurturing environment to be able to have an form so that people can be heard. And it might sound simple, but it's so very powerful and effective. There's a lot of people out here that just feels like they are alone and they don't really know where to go to get help. And a kind gesture is so powerful that it can literally heal the planet. So each and every last one of us doing a little something from a kind gesture can make a big difference in this world. And with your organization and a platform that you have created, it is what the world needs, especially in these dark times that we're living in.
I love that you said that. We have a partnership with TikTok, and I did a video, um, literally just saying, go and do something nice for somebody today without ever expecting any thank you in return, just a selfless act. And it got, I think, almost 300,000 views and hundreds of comments from all over this country letting us know what they did. And
Wow.
it's simple. I gave somebody a hug today. I gave somebody a ride today. And it's small gestures of kindness that's going to change the world and make it a better place.
Yeah. So, Josh, this episode is about learning through listening for
Yes.
leadership. Now, I know this relates to your time in the Army in a number of ways, but can you tell me a little bit more about what that topic means to you?
About learning through listening.
Yes.
Yeah, of course. I mean, in the military, it's very structured. You have your privates all the way up to your sergeant majors on the enlisted side, and then you have lieutenants all the way up to generals on the officer side. And it's ingrained in you from very early on in the military to respect and listen to what your superior officers are saying, because it can mean the difference between life and death. And so, in the military, with the structure that's there, when I was in Iraq, we had every detail down to the second, because at the end of the day, it was our lives on the line. It was your battle buddies' lives on the line. And so I think that, you know, when you listen, you're just automatically going to ingest. And I love that you said earlier about, it seems like today's society is so engrossed in their smart devices, and nobody takes a moment to just look somebody in the eye and say hi anymore. And I think that why the military was so successful back then is because there was no smart devices. I mean, we were in Iraq. I didn't have a smartphone. I didn't have a phone at all. I used to have to pay our interpreters money just to call home because there was an 8 or a 9 hour time difference. And so, listening just in society in general, to me, is something that I feel like we've lost. And podcasts like this that highlight the need for it in the communities, I think is such a great first step forward.
Yes, I totally agree, Josh, and I think we are on the same page. And this is the thing when you talk about listening for leadership, it is when you're listening to a person, you're not just hearing them. You're listening to their pain.
Yep.
You're listening to through their addictions. You're listening through so many egoic attachments that people have become so addicted to, that to listen is your ability to interpret and also help you make the right decision for that person that you're listening to. Because you can be listening to somebody and not hearing them, and they go home and commit suicide.
Yes.
But if you would have given them that little extra attention and that presence, you probably would have been able to attune or connect to whatever issues, and you could have came up with a better solution to help them in that particular moment. So that is a very powerful practice when you talk about listening for leadership, so that you can be able to effectively give your people the right information that they need to help them in that moment.
When I left the military, I was full of anger, full of rage, and I didn't know why. There was a lot of things that I didn't sort through. And my wife said it best one time. I was driving, and I used to have really bad road rage. And she said, "You never know what the person in front of you is going through." And it really hit me at that moment that I don't know. And me being 3 seconds late to an appointment or to pick up groceries, would I rather be 3 seconds late if I know that I could potentially help somebody by not experiencing anger while I'm driving. And I really took that a little deeper into trying to make that a part of my life now, where I just stop and I don't become so engrossed in anger and just ill feelings towards people. And I feel like it's really made my life better. So thank you.
How has it made it better, Josh?
Well, I'm a more present husband. I'm more present for my kids. I'm calmer. My two of my younger kids that are still in the house, I noticed that they were getting road rage when they were in the vehicle with me, or they were being rude to other people. And that was a direct correlation because of my actions and my behavior.
That's amazing. And it took a bit of presence to notice how your behavior was impacting them. And I know early on we talked about breaking the generational curse and those things. Now imagine if you just take it back to your father, your forefather, his father, etc. And here you have this opportunity in this present day to impact your children that way. You're
Mhm.
impacting us that way. You're impacting others that you come in contact with. It's amazing. Yes, we're using listening, but in some cases you are stopping the noise in your head.
Yes, the noise in your head will harm you, and I can personally attest to that. And I know we were talking off camera about this, but I think it's important to touch on that generational, breaking that generational cycle. My father was the youngest of 13 kids on a Native American reservation. And when he was 8 years old, his father grabbed him out of bed, threw him in the truck, drove him up to the top of what we call Mission Hill in Michigan in the middle of the night and left him there and told him not to come home if he couldn't find his way back. And I didn't learn this on until later on in life, but my dad had taken that anger that he had learned from his dad and then couldn't control it with me and my mother. I'm the oldest of six. And I stepped in one night in between my mom and dad and protected my mother. And then later on in life, I started to become that angry, bitter person like my father was. But I realized what I was doing. And I think that that's how I broke that generational cycle. So now my kids aren't going to ever have to experience what a chaotic life was like for me growing up.
Well, Josh, what you said a word that was very profound, and you said you realize the realization. And that's sort of like an awakening
Yes.
because you had enough awareness, enough presence to be able to step back and see something that you had not seen before. And I always say this, the most important thing that we have to take responsibility for is our state of consciousness, how we feeling, how we are, our behavior. I mean, just being able to realize what our state of consciousness is. And the main thing the thing that determines your state of consciousness is your degree of presence. How present am I to be able to know that I'm not feeling good, so I got to be careful about what I say around the kids today. I got to go get me some rest. I got to go get me something to eat. I'm going into this meeting. I got to be present. And in doing that, that is a realization that I think that you have an awakened to. And I'm just so excited about that and how you're going to pass that down and along to your children and break that cycle.
There's something called a hero's journey. And I read this the other day, and it said you can never be the best version of yourself if you are the victim of your own story. And
Mhm.
so I've tried to embrace that fully because all of us can find faults within each other, with other people, but you can just as easily find the good things in people. why not compliment them instead of denigrate them and try to make them feel lower than you just to make yourself feel better?
Yes.
You know, Josh, we've been talking about this on a personal level with your family, but with VetLife, you've grown it to over 300 veterans that you're currently reaching. So you have the opportunity to put this app and this opportunity around even more people and impact even more lives. So when it comes to innovation and strategy, what made this kind of community impact possible?
So the app just hit 330,000 downloads.
Congratulations.
Yes, yes. So I started working for the government after I left the military, and I realized really quickly that we have what I call a backwards veteran resource provision model, where we expect the veteran to come to the government to search out their benefits, but we don't explain what benefits they're entitled to or how to go about getting them. So most veterans just go to social media and ask a question in a Facebook veterans group, and they end up getting 999 wrong answers. We know on average a veteran will ask for help 3 times. And if they don't get the help after the third time, they just stop asking and blend into society. So I was working for the state in their Veterans Affairs Agency. And my job was to coordinate benefits for 63,000 veterans in a 6 county region. And I realized that at these town halls I was doing, I would get 40, 50, 60 resource providers, but only a handful of veterans. And I started talking to veterans, and they would say, well, I'm not allowed to bring my family here. And I'm not going to the local VFW. I'm not going to the local American Legion anymore. So these type of things are almost useless to me. So my wife and I sat down and created VetLife, but more importantly, we created an event called VetFest, where we invite the veteran and their family. It's a free event. We bring somewhere between 3 to 4,000 veterans down into one localized area and bring the resource providers to connect the dots. And 1 month after that event, we see a 60% increase in veterans going down to those local vetted resources to gain access to their benefits. And we were helping a lot of Michigan veterans, but I started getting messages from veterans all over the country. Hey, I'd love to have a VetFest event in Texas, Alabama, Florida. And so my wife and I sat down and created the Battle Buddy app, which is a single source touch point for every single benefit you're entitled to. We don't just educate you, we connect you, empower you. And so by empowering these veterans, we're going to reduce the veteran suicide rate because, and it goes back to what we talked about before. When you just do something nice for somebody without ever asking for anything in return, you don't know how much that improves their mental health and can potentially save their life.
Mhm.
Josh, that is a big undertaking. So it obviously has to mean a whole lot to you personally. So when you think about how do I keep this momentum going, what drives you at this point?
Well, there's 20 million veterans in this country. There's 200,000 people that leave the military every year. What really drives me is one day I was sitting in my office and a Vietnam veteran had came in and said that somebody had told him when he left the military that he wasn't a veteran because he didn't volunteer. He was drafted. So he went 30 years without ever accessing his military benefits. And the stories he told me about being spit on and called derogatory names for his service, I never want that to be repeated again. And I never want a veteran or their family to ever go without the benefits or the support that they're entitled to. I think that we should be connecting these veterans prior to leaving the military service, which is why I'm working with the federal government or I did work with the federal government to help codify a program called Solid Start, where we call newly transitioning veterans 3 times in one calendar year And I'm actively working to get the Battle Buddy app inserted into that program. So when the veterans leave the military, they already have the app on their smart device, and it's a national app. So regardless of what state you go to, there's benefits on that app that we can tell you within your zip code where to go to get connected.
Yeah. So when you think about that now, both the federal government that's attempting to help and individuals that understand that plight a little bit more, is there a place for empathetic listening inside the Army and out?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's a difficult one to answer because empathy isn't necessarily there's not necessarily a correlation between empathy and military service because you're quite honestly, you're always actively training for wartime simulations. And so I think where the real empathy needs to happen, and it's not happening, is that transitionary process. We have to better equip our veterans with how to be able to, decompress and transition from that hypervigilance over into the civilian world. I do think that there is a time and place for empathy. I'm not necessarily sold on the idea of having it during your military service because I think you have to be the best and toughest version of yourself to protect your country, your family, your way of life, and your ideals and values.
Yeah, that's a very good delineation, and thank you for sharing that.
Well, Josh, you seem to be the type of guy who have always had the ability to take lemons and make them into lemonade.
Oh
And
man, we haven't got my wife on here because I was a bitter person for a very long time, and it was her that really brought me uh, into a better version of myself. And so I always like to give credit where credit is due. This is my journey right now. And now that I just want to be the best version of myself for my wife and my kids and my family, yeah, I would agree now that, you know, turning, lemons into lemonade or orange into orange juice, whatever you want to call it, it was a process for me. And it wasn't always that way.
yeah,
You've made it clear what you want policymakers, partners, and communities to understand when veterans are transitioning from military life to civilian life. Is there anything else that you would want them to get by listening to someone who's been there?
Yes, and that is a great question because what I've seen is that the government tends to listen to rank rather than the actual veteran, or they tend to listen to the organizations with the most money. And if you're not listening to what the veterans want, you're not getting the right answers. And I think we've seen that. I mean, if you listen to any of these testimonies in front of, the House or the Senate, it's always people that may not have necessarily struggled or have went through the same hardships that some of these, privates and sergeants and lower non-commissioned officers have went through. And I think it's time where we need to start listening to the everyday veteran because their voice is the one that's going to make this a better system.
Yeah. We thank you for that. Thank you. And thank you for all the work that you've done. But
Of
we're
course.
not done yet with this discussion because I want to go a little bit deeper. You said, I wish my wife was in this conversation with us. We do too, but she's not here now. So you're just going to have to channel your inner wife right now. What I want to talk to you a little bit about, Josh, which is very, very important. And that is you talked about the things that made a difference for you and making your transition. You talked about the things that you would like to do to make a difference for others and their transition out of military. I want you to tell us what you see the future is to bridge the gap between those two things, like what you experience and what you've seen others experience.
I love that question. So I received a random email from someone from the small business committee for the house for the federal government a couple days ago, and I she asked to jump on a call, and they want to potentially fly me out to Washington next Wednesday to testify. And what I said to her was, and it is so simple, and the government spends billions and billions of dollars annually, not just to combat veteran suicide, but to help bridge the gap. The VA has 54 apps on the App Store, and it just confuses veterans. We need one simple transitionary process. We need solid start, calling those veterans 3 times in one calendar year. And we need the Battle Buddy app downloaded in every veteran independent smart device moving forward. Veterans need time to decompress after they leave the military, and shoving large amounts of information and paperwork at them right before they leave the service is not doing them a justice. It's doing them an injustice. So, what I see in the next 3 to 5 years is that app, that Battle Buddy app that we created, growing to millions of downloads. And we're going to be able to actually show that we can reduce the veteran suicide rate by empowering them to be their own best advocates rather than the government telling the veteran what they need to do. Let's let the veteran decide what's best for them.
Awesome. Awesome. That is fantastic. I mean, I just wanna keep digging more and more into that. But what's most exciting is you're using your own life as an example. And
Yes.
when we all sit back and it's like, I haven't been perfect. I'm not perfect. There's things that can be better, but I can take all of that goodness from what I felt and now I can share that with somebody else. And that's exactly what you have done using this
Thank
app
you.
as a vehicle.
And Josh, I see you as a light. I see you as a light of love. And all of the things that have happened in your past kind of shaped you and mold you to be where you are and be ready for the task that you're taking on today. So the weight that you carried during the course of your life toughened you up because we need you more now in these times than ever. And there are so many people that is in need of help and to be listened to, especially our veterans. And you leading that charge and carrying that light, I just want to say thank you and keep up the good work.
Thank you. I really appreciate you saying that, Emmanuel.
Yeah, we appreciate it.
That was so
Yes.
nice.
Yes.
So we think of listening as a simple skill, but it's actually one of the hardest skills. I mean, truly listening, and there is different types of listening that we will address later. But really listening to someone is only when you can actually hear them.
Yep.
Not thinking about what you're gonna say next, not anticipating, "Oh, well, they didn't say that right." I'm judging what they had to say, but actually listening, and we think that is so important. So, thank you for doing that. Thank you for your team. Thank you for your wife. Thank you for your children. Thank you for your father, your grandfather, and everyone you've come in contact to be a lesson for you to be a better listener, so therefore you're able to create something that is helping thousands and will eventually help millions.
Thank you.
Absolutely. All right. You have been listening to More Details, Please. So before we go, Josh, can you share how can our listeners get in touch with you?
Yes, of course. So at our website should be a central point because that's where all the information is. It's www.vetlifetoday.org. And all of our social media handles are at VetLife Today. One thing I didn't mention that I'd love to mention very quickly is we have a radio show.
Oh,
A lot of veterans lose their voices when they leave the military. And so we created a radio show that's on its 70th episode called From Glory Days Veterans Edition, where we've interviewed everybody from the general of the army down to the average everyday military grunt. So anybody that's prior military knows that is a colloquial term of endearment. So, yep. And that's all on all of the streaming platforms. So thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you for sharing. And to our audience, you're listening to More Details, please. We're talking about an important topic on listening. And Emmanuel and I can practice that more every day.
Thank you for listening to More Details, Please, presented by Emmanuel and Angela Williams from Detail Experts, the mobile steam cleaning company dedicated to protecting the planet. Be sure to subscribe to More Details, Please on your favorite podcast platform. You can also follow us on Facebook at Detail Experts and visit detailexperts.net. That's DETAILXPERTS.net. We hope you've gained some valuable insights from our conversations today. Stay driven by curiosity, and we'll bring you more details next time.